Sorry, let me just get my screen shared. So hopefully you can all see my first slide there.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, well, like every other year, we have some rule changes. I don't think that this year we've got very many that are going to cause us big problems, but we'll and one in particular is going to make life a lot simpler for us. But let's go through some of those changes. Before I do that, let me remind you that everything related to the IFAF rules and also the IAFOA mechanics is available on the IAFOA website, which is myiafoa.org. So you can get this rule book in PDF if you want to download it and look at it yourself. There's also an HTML format. The HTML format isn't 100% accurate with the PDF. The PDF is the official version. I hope to improve the quality of the HTML format later this year. We've also got a number of translations, one or two there already, and more are in the offing. If anybody here wants to translate the rule book into their own language, that's let me know, and I'll try and make things as easy for you to do that as possible. You can join IFOA for free, but to get access to the discussion forum, you have to register on the website. And I have to, unfortunately, have to turn down the occasional registration, because the rule is you have to use your real full name, and people who pick usernames that are nicknames or just one part of their name or something like that, I have to turn down. So if you want to register, pass that message on to anyone else who wants to do that as well. Okay, so there are just 12 rule changes this year, 6 of which we've got from NCAA, 6 of which are IFAF changes, but the one of those is an old NCAA change that we didn't adopt a few years ago. So the biggie, the one that I think will make life a lot simpler for us as officials. Experience talking to Bill about it, experience of bringing in this rule in college football in the States showed that it seemed to make things simpler for coaches and players as well. If you've been officiating as long as I have, you know that NCAA changed the blocking below the waist rule nearly every year, and it's gradually getting more and more restrictive, but it's also getting easier and easier for people to understand and to apply. So the change this year, let's look at Team A first of all. So there's a very restricted, much more restricted number of people who can block below the waist. So linemen who are inside the tackle box can block below the waist on their initial line charge. And for that purpose, the tackle box is considered to stretch a yard beyond the line of scrimmage. So previously we said that that could be anywhere in the free blocking zone, which, as you know, stretches 3 yards downfield. But basically the initial line contact should be within about a yard of the line of scrimmage. We don't need to be very picky about that, but that's what the rule says. But once that they've done their initial charge, they can still continue to block below the waist, but thereafter they they're also subject to the condition that the force of the block has to be directed from the target's front. And that's where our 10-2 definition comes in. Now, as well as linemen, if there's a stationary back located within the tackle box at the snap, they can, again, block below the waist, but again, only if it's directed from the front. So basically, the rule isn't much different from them from previously, but like before, once the ball has left the tackle box, many more restrictions come into place, and effectively nobody can block below the waist. A big difference this year is that players who started outside the tackle box, so tight ends, split ends, people like that, they can't block below the waist at all. So looking at this from an officiating standpoint, you know, as officials, we don't have to worry about the initial line charge, because basically there's nothing that those linemen can do as long as it's not a chop block. They can block from the front, they can clip from the back. They don't have to be within the 10-2 region. But thereafter, 10-2 becomes the sort of standard that all the players have to meet. And so anything subsequently done by linemen or anything done by backs at any time has to be from the target players, from the opponent's 10-2 region, so they can see it coming. The other thing that keeps it simple from an officiating point of view is that you know at the snap who can block below the waist and who can't, because it's only those players who are stationary inside the tackle box at the moment of the snap who are allowed to block below the waist. You don't have to keep track of them. So if they leave the tackle box and come back in, they're allowed to block below the waist. So it's, a few years ago, we had a rule that said once they'd left the tackle box, they couldn't come back into the tackle box and block below the waist, but that's not the case now. So it's simple. And the other simple thing is that anybody who starts wide or anyone who's in motion cannot block below the waist. So again, a simplification. And then another thing that makes it really easy is that anything outside the tackle box is a foul. So we've no longer got this rule about whether blocks by team A are more than 5 yards downfield. We've no longer got the crackback rule that said that made blocks illegal if they were into the center of the field towards the position of the ball at the snap. That's all out the window. If anybody outside the tackle box blocks below the waist, that's going to be a foul. And then from a timing perspective, once the ball has left the tackle box, then all blocking below the waist by team A is going to be a foul. And that's the case even if the ball comes back into the tackle box. So these changes are all really good simplifications that make it a lot easier for us. The restrictions on Team B have changed as well. Basically now, the only Team B players who can block below the waist are the ones who are lined up against offensive linemen. So only stationary Team B players lined up immediately opposite offensive linemen inside the tackle box may block below the waist. So that puts them on an equal basis with the offensive linemen who are opposing them. And then every other Team B player is restricted. They cannot block below the waist except the usual one against the ball carrier or a simulated ball carrier. They can use that blocking below the waist as a means to make the tackle. So again, from an officiating point of view, we don't have to worry about the initial line charge. Once that's over, any block below the waist by Team B, unless it's an attempt to tackle the runner, is going to be a foul. Okay, so we move on now.
Sorry, Jim, a couple of questions there.
Yep.
I'll go back to the previous slide. When you say immediately opposite offensive linemen, do they have to be face on? If you've got a Team B player in the gap and you're going to shoot the gap, is that different from immediately opposite an offensive lineman?
No, they just have to be within, they just have to be stationary within the tackle box extended. They don't have to be directly lined up over a player.
Okay, another question. There is a CFO bulletin which states once a player leaves the tackle box, the player is considered as outside the tackle box. In IFAF, you may come back in and block below the waist. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Okay, and Ben Griffiths has asked, what about a defensive end lined up outside or an outside shade of a tackle?
Well, technically, he's not lined up inside the tackle box. I think if he's over the tackle in some way, then that's okay. But if he's much wider than that, then he's restricted and not allowed to block below the waist. We've got to be sensible about our interpretation of this. We're not out there with rulers measuring millimeters of difference. If someone looks like they're lined up over an offensive lineman, then treat them as that.
Okay, I think that answers most of them.
Yeah. And
sorry, was a final one. Is blocking below the waist towards your own end line legal again, provided these are from the front?
Yeah, it's not absolutely prohibited, but it has to be from 10 to 2 in the 10 to 2 region.
Right, okay. Right, thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to the, sorry, that's twice. So we've got some tweaks to penalty enforcement changes. So the penalty for an illegal block after a fair catch signal. So that's if the player gives the fair catch signal, and then rather than catching the ball, he then goes and blocks someone. It was a 15-yard penalty, but it's now been reclassified as a 10-yard penalty, unless the contact is forcible enough that it's unnecessary roughness and becomes a personal foul. So I think this is just a reflection that a normal block under those circumstances shouldn't be regarded as bad as a personal foul. So it's more akin to a holding foul. Then they've changed the penalty for illegal touching of a forward pass. So it's always been a 5-yard penalty, but it's now a 5-yard penalty and loss of down. And that makes it the same penalty as many forms of illegal forward pass. So illegally touching the end of the pass is penalised the same as illegally throwing the pass at a time or place when you're not allowed to do so. They've also changed the rule on unsportsmanlike conduct on a pass play, but basically this just brings it into line with the way penalties are enforced for personal fouls. So typically, if you have a personal foul anytime during a pass play, you tag the penalty on to the end of the run, provided the pass is complete. So it seemed a bit iniquitous that the same thing didn't happen for unsportsmanlike conduct fouls. So now it does. Again, that's a simplification because you can now treat unsportsmanlike conduct and personal fouls the same. And then another simplification isn't officiating is going to be really easy this year, isn't it? With all these simplified rule changes. So this one is about defensive holding. Previously, there was only an automatic first down if it was on a play where the pass was thrown and the pass crossed the neutral zone. But now all defensive holding fouls will carry an automatic first down. So it considerably simplifies the penalty enforcement and the amount of information that the crew has to gather before knowing what penalty to march off. So as a tweak to the substitution rule, a rule change last year made it a live ball foul now for Team B to have more than 11 players on the field. You have to wait until the ball is snapped. But we had an exception that if the play clock ran out and Team B had more than 11 players on the field, then you penalised B for the illegal substitution rather than Team A for the delay of game. So that was based on the assumption that Team A are so confused by Team B having 12 or more players on the field that they don't get the ball snapped in time. But it was pointed out that another thing that Team A might do in that situation is call a timeout in order to avoid what they think is their delay of game penalty. So what we've added this year is if they call a timeout when there's 5 seconds or less on the play clock, then we'll treat that the same as if the play clock had run out, and we're going to penalise Team B for that. And just in case you're wondering, we would not charge Team A for that timeout. We would assume that they had done it because Team B had 12 players on the field. Okay. Moving on. This is a rule change that NCAA introduced in 2013, so it's actually 10 years old. But we didn't introduce it at the time because we thought that it was very unlikely that an IFAF game or a game in any of our countries was going to be so accurately timed that this would make a difference. But I think there's been a big step change in the, first of all, in the number of venues where we have stadium game clocks. I think there's been an improvement in the quality of game clock operators, and also it's much easier now to operate game clock from on or near to the field, which usually leads to more accurate timing as well. So this covers a rather unlikely scenario, but if the game clock is stopped with only a few seconds left in a period, and it's going to start on the ready for play, then if there are 3 seconds left, 3 or more seconds, then it's reasonable to think that Team A might snap the ball and spike it and stop the clock in order that they've then got time for another play in that period. But if there's only 1 or 2 seconds left on the clock, they won't be able to do that. Once the ball is ready for play, once the clock starts, they'll only have time for 1 more play in that period. So this only applies when the game clock is going to start on the ready for play. So it might be after a penalty enforcement, it might be after you've moved the chains or something like that. And it still requires Team A to spike the ball effectively. So if they fool around, if there isn't a clean snap or anything like that, then it's unlikely that they're going to get 2 plays in that period. So I'll be interested to see when this first gets applied. But somewhere, sometime out there, it might happen to you, and so you need to be ready for it. Here's another rule change that is a simplification from an officiating point of view. So a few years ago, we followed NCAA's lead in introducing a 40-second clock after a touchdown. Because usually after a score, there will be a 25-second clock that starts on the ready for play. But NCAA thought that this was a phase of the game that could be speeded up. That's reasonable for Team A because they're driving, they're wanting to score, they're hoping to score. So having their field goal team ready for an extra point is a reasonable thing to expect them to do. But it's a little bit unfair on Team B to have its field goal team on standby, just because there's a possibility that they might intercept a pass or recover a fumble and return that for a touchdown. So the change this year is that if there's a Team B score, there will be a 25-second play clock. A number of people have got confused by this already and asked me, well, isn't that giving them a shorter period rather than a longer period? Well, of course, we all know that the 25-second clock starts on the ready for play, whereas the 40-second clock starts at the end of the previous play. So this is much more under the control of the officials and therefore less likely to lead to a delay of game penalty. This next one, I'm not certain that this is a simplification, but it's, I think, a necessary rule. There was a Division I college game in the States last year where a quarterback was running with the ball. He faked a feet-first slide, so the defenders stopped and didn't try to tackle him, but he actually stayed on his feet and kept running. And I think it was reasonable for NCAA to rule that that was unfair. And so now, if you simulate or fake a feet first slide, then the ball is dead. So we don't want to unfairly, hold the defense from tackling someone who is trying to take advantage of this. We've got a couple of changes on player equipment. So a minor one is we've deleted some words. A glove was defined as something that completely covered each finger and thumb. We don't believe that fingerless gloves give anyone an advantage or a disadvantage or are a safety issue. So we've taken those words out to permit fingerless gloves. And there's been a lot of questions over the last few years. I probably get more questions about eye shields than any other topic as rules editor. And it's clearly an area where we need to simplify things and just make it absolutely clear to teams that any eye shield that is tinted or reflective is just not acceptable. It has to be totally clear. So we've got now a definition of clear. So it's not clear if it obscures a player's eyes at any time from any angle or in any light condition. So if you see a player early on in the game and you think, okay, that eye shield is legal, but then later on you see the player from a different angle and suddenly you think that that eye shield isn't legal anymore, then you have the grounds to ask them to remove it. And we've also added the words mirrored eyewear is expressly prohibited to make it hopefully clear and obvious to players and teams that any form of mirroring isn't permitted at all. And if they turn around and say, well, I've seen college players in the States or NFL players play with mirrored eyewear, invite them to go and play for an American college or for an NFL team. That's not our rule. A little bit
Jim, a question on the tinted, the eyewear.
Yeah.
Is this now saying that even if there's a small amount of tint and you can still see the person's eyes, then that's okay now?
If you can see, well, this is all a question of judgment. What we want is things that are completely clear, but even any layer of plastic provides, it stops some light going through. Now, I'm not a physicist, and I certainly don't carry around with me on field equipment that would measure how opaque an eye shield is. If you can see the player's eyes clearly, then that's probably okay. But can you see that from all angles, from all directions? When the sun is shining, when the sun goes behind a cloud, all sorts of different light conditions. There is a reasonable expectation that opponents can see a player's eyes so that you can see which direction the opponent is looking at, whether he's looking at you or whether he's looking at another player. So it's all part of that, as well as the safety aspect of the medical personnel being able to see a player's eyes if there's a possibility that he's being knocked out.
I think the question's about whether there's been a sort of philosophy, if there's any tint whatsoever, we don't allow it, but this is bringing a bit of ambiguity into it now, isn't it? Where you're going, it looks as if it will create problems now by changing the line.
If you look at the eye shield and it's tinted, it isn't completely clear.
Okay. Fine, thank you. Okay.
And then a change that probably won't impact on very many people. We've mandated goalpost padding for some time, but sometimes the goalpost is so far outside the field that it isn't really a safety hazard. We have a lot of venues in Great Britain where there is a mesh fence around the field, and sometimes the goalposts are outside that fence. Well, if the players can't run through the fence, they're not going to hit the goalpost, and there's no necessity for it to be padded. So we've defined goalposts as not requiring padding if they're more than 12 feet beyond the end line, and if they're beyond a barrier that would stop players running into them. Of course, the barrier has to be safe. A mesh fence usually is. If it's something, if it's a lower fence that a player might fall over, then that's probably not non-hazardous. But we've introduced that as a change. And strictly, this is an editorial change, but I thought I'd mention it here. We've made a rule change that says that the yardage markers on the goal lines must be 18 feet outside the sideline or removed. You see on games from the States quite often that the officials ruling on goal line plays have photographers and people like that behind them. It's a very cramped area. This is a bit of a safety issue. One of the things that makes that area cramped is if the yardage markers are 12 feet from the sideline, which is where they would normally be down the rest of the field. So the easiest thing to do to give yourself more space around the goal line is to move the yardage markers back 18 feet. Occasionally that won't be possible because there isn't enough room to do that. So you can remove them completely if that gives you a bit more space to work in. But this is all about the safety of the officials.
Hey, Jim, I've just got a quick question. Some vehicles asked, is there anything on slide 17? Did we skip that? Was that slide 17? Yeah,
we're skipping the slides. I've already got this presentation prepared for BAFA rules, and I've taken out the ones that are only relevant to Britain.
Well, it's good to see that VACO was paying attention, I suppose.
Yeah.
Another question, Jim, has came in. Yeah. Another question has come in, but probably not sure whether you can give a definitive answer on this. If the runner fakes a slide and a Team B player goes high, is it targeting?
Well, if it meets the rules for targeting, yes, it does. He's a defenseless player, and so any contact to his head could be targeting if there's sufficient force. And of course, if the defender comes in helmet first, then we could have a round of helmet targeting.
Thank you.
So where have we got to? Okay, so we've got a few points of emphasis in the rule book this year. One is about coaches who enter the field to debate officiating decisions. I think that's a really diplomatic way to say that. We don't want coaches doing that. Ideally, we don't want coaches staying on the sideline and debating officiating decisions. But it's got to be a red line if the coach comes onto the field and starts complaining at you. Throw your flag. We know that coaches can step to the sideline to call plays, but we emphasize that coaches are expected to set an example to players and fans. There's also a point of emphasis about disconcerting signals. This seems to be on the increase, certainly in the US, and some of these trends sometimes make their way into European football. So this is just a reminder of what are the rules against what the defense can do. They're not allowed to interfere with the offense's signals. Somebody's drawing on the screen, and I'm not quite sure. And then there are points of emphasis about sportsmanship, again, to remind coaches to set a good example for their team, and about not permitting anyone to address uncomplimentary remarks to officials. Quickly go through a few editorial changes. When this is only for penalty reports, but we've introduced separate penalty reports for 913 targeting, 914 targeting, and if you've got a player who's committed both of those, you'll use those different codes. We've also introduced separate codes for all the different varieties of offensive and defensive pass interference and for offensive holding, so we can collect richer information about what sort of foul you've called. And then we've introduced an additional code for dead ball shoving, the sort of unsportsmanlike conduct that you get in and around a pile after a play has ended. And then there are editorial changes about the material from which the chains are made. an increase in the area of the jersey that can have logos on it. If you've got coaching booths, they should be approximately the same, and coaches can't communicate from outside the playing enclosure as defined in Rule 2. And then to emphasize that drones can't be used to film the game. I did think this year that we would be able to liberalize the rules on drones. I looked at advice from aviation authorities in a couple of countries, and there doesn't seem to be an easy way to police this. So for the moment, we're going to keep that prohibited. There's an extra element to being a defenseless player, just to emphasize that you don't extend a period during a running clock session. We've clarified the wording to make it easier to understand whether a 25 or 40-second clock applies after an injury or a player losing their helmet, or where both those things happen at the same time. Don't play unnecessary tries in extra periods, treated it the same as the end of the fourth quarter. We've now got a new signal for blindside block. I don't know how many of you can still see me, but it's the bringing two fists together in front of your chest. NCAA revised the definition of the crown of the helmet, so it's now 6-inch radius from the top. And then if the kicker takes the ball outside the tackle box, or takes possession of the ball outside the tackle box, that ends their roughing the kicker protection. And then I think this is the final slide. Team can't review things that have already been reviewed by the video judge, but up until the time that there's a ready for play, they can have they can request another aspect of the play gets reviewed. We've said that the position of the ball in relation to the goal line is reviewable. That was always true if there was a question about whether there was a touchdown or a safety, but this can also be used to clarify whether it's a touchback or not. We've emphasized that video judges can make decisions about whether the ball is dead due to forward progress. That isn't the case in college rules, that isn't the case in NFL rules, but it is the case in IFAF rules. You can also review kicking team players going out of bounds, and the video judge should only put time back on the clock in the fourth quarter if the result is still in doubt. So if play ticks down and then the clock ticks down to 0, and then you reverse a call, but it's a 14-point game, don't worry about it, the game's over. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Jim, there's just a question. If you go back to the disconcerting signals section.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe a question for Alex or Bill to answer. It's about, have you seen any issues in the States this season regarding more abrupt movements by the defense at the line of scrimmage that would result in calling this foul? Because you do see a lot of the defense are allowed to shift, obviously, but have you seen any issues that we should know about this year?
Bill and I know, Bill knows that I talk to him all the time about this. I could probably give you from our conference a clinic on disconcerting signals on the defense, and Bill may or may not agree with him, but it has been a point of emphasis, in particular in the SEC, with the clapping and the players stunting and things like that, and what is restricted and what is not restricted. I say use common sense. Obviously, if the guy's clapping and it causes the offensive player to react, then you got to make a decision whether that clap simulated the start of the play. As far as stunting or unnatural movements and all that, I don't know how much of a thing that is in Europe. But again, does that unnatural movement cause the offense to false start? That's the decision you have to make, rather than going down a laundry list of stuff similar to what we have in the SEC now that automatically warrants disconcerting signals or delay of game defense.
Okay, thanks, Alec. Anything
Yeah.
from yourself, Bill?
Yeah, if I could just add one thing to that, and again, it's about game management, is that when the defense does one of these things, if the offense doesn't respond to it, how can it be disconcerting signals? You know, it's like the player who goes into the neutral zone and he gets back and the offense doesn't react to it. He hasn't committed a foul. So, you know, don't go searching for this. Let it be something that, you know, it's affected the offense, and that's why it's disconcerting. Otherwise you're going to, you know, I've seen this year what I would call a myriad of calls on the defense that we just shook our head at and said it had absolutely no effect on the play. Why are we going there?
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
I was going to say that's the time for a talk to, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Right, thanks very much, Alec. Thanks, Bill, for that. We're going to have a 10-minute break, and then we'll hear Bill's presentation. So be back, and you have 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So hopefully everyone's back now, and I want to hand you over to Bill Lamortier. Who's going to give this presentation on blocking below the waist. And over to you, Bill.
All right, so let's see if I'm open here and get my screen up here. All right.